Good afternoon. I'd like to call the, November 20th Ordinance Committee meeting to order, considering ordinance amendments to the average unit size density incentive program, phase 1. May we have a roll call?
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Rouse. Madam Chair Snedden.
Here. Thank you. And do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda?
We do not, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'd like to invite staff presentation.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Metzger, Project Planner for the AUD amendments. We are here today to receive your recommendation on Phase 1 of these amendments and forward it to City Council as a whole. Today, we are presenting amendments to the first phase of the AUD program, which include increasing required parking spaces for the AUD units with 3 or more bedrooms outside of the central business district, restrictions on the conversion of AUD projects to hotels or similar uses, and removing the AUD parking incentive from the existing mobile home parks. For some of you, this may be some review, but I would like to give a quick background of the AUD program. The concept of the AUD program began with the adoption of the 2011 General Plan, which included policies to encourage smaller, more affordable rental and workforce units close to transit, commercial services, and recreational opportunities. The program established smaller unit sizes while allowing flexibility for larger units, which helps subsidize the cost of the entire project. The program ordinance encourages housing by implementing increased densities based on average unit size and type. The smaller the average unit size for the project, the greater the density that is allowed. It also reduces parking setbacks and open space standards. These ordinance incentives, adopted in 2013, are provided to assist in making construction of additional residential units more possible in our city. To orientate everyone, here is a map of the AUD program shown in the colors. And also showing on this map is the central business district with the heavy black border around the downtown area. In 2016, decision makers realized the program should be reviewed, and a housing task force was formed to see if certain aspects of the program were meeting the intent of the general plan policies. Based on 11 public meetings and a nexus study and economic feasibility study, the Housing Task Force recommended changes to Council. In 2017, and also earlier this year, City Council then took some of those recommendations and directed staff to initiate the ordinance amendment process. And now I will go into more depth on the proposed amendments before the Ordinance Committee here today. Planning Commission has forwarded a recommendation of approval language on these next slides. The first proposed amendment is in regards to required parking for AUD units with 3 or more bedrooms, and its purpose is to better meet anticipated parking demand for larger AUD program units outside of the central business district. The language of the amendment is shown in Attachment 1 of your report and on this and the next slide as well. Currently, the AUD ordinance requires 1 space per unit with no guest parking, regardless of unit size or number of bedrooms. The amendment proposes to require 2 parking spaces for units with 3 or more bedrooms. This standard will not be in effect in the central business district because residential parking demand is less there due to the ease of walking and biking, the proximity of uses, and availability of transit. In addition, due to higher land costs in the central business district, the reduced parking standards are considered necessary as a valuable incentive to encourage housing development in this area. Furthermore, the central business district has had reduced parking of one space for residential units and mixed-use projects since before the adoption of the AUD program. The proposed language from the previous slide goes on to mirror that of other parking requirements in the AUD program for studios, 1 and 2 bedrooms, as shown here, and also in attachment 1 of your staff report. The next amendment before your committee today relates to hotel conversions. The purpose is to retain multi-unit housing as intended with the AUD program by prohibiting conversion of AUD program projects to hotels or similar uses, including short-term rentals. The Planning Commission also recommends this language for adoption, and the language is proposed to be added to the AUD chapter as well as the hotel conversion chapter in the zoning ordinance. Finally, Planning Commission is forwarding staff's recommendation to protect existing mobile home park housing. The purpose of this is to remove incentives to redevelop existing mobile home parks, which provide vital housing for low-income and senior residents. The language shown in attachment 1 of your report and also here removes the parking incentive from the existing mobile home parks. This parking incentive is the only incentive besides the base density that exists for these areas. These 3 amendments were reviewed by the Planning Commission on September 13th and also November 1st. The Planning Commission heard much public comment from existing park occupants during the mobile home park hearing on November 1st. Due to these public comments, the Planning Commission also requests that Council protect these parks to the greatest extent feasible from redevelopment. This slide shows our proposed timeline for Phase 1, barring any unforeseen issues. If we receive your recommendation today, our next hearing will be to present these amendments to the City Council as a whole on January 15th for adoption. Here is the recommended action for your committee, and that concludes staff's presentation. We are here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have questions? Mayor Pro Tem Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the definition of a bedroom, and I'm trying to think of somebody that have a 3-bedroom unit and they wanted to relabel one of the bedrooms as a den or a study. I mean, is there a way to control that? Is there a definition that we use?
Through the chair, Mr. Rouse, the definition of bedroom includes the having a closet attached to it. So if they remove the closet, then it would be considered more of that den option.
Okay. All right, very good. And then in terms of this being, we've had these discussions about it, trying to amend this policy for a little while now, as you know. And this is Phase 1. What is, do you know what yet is included in Phase 2, what we're not talking about today?
Yes, through the chair, we can show you a slide on that, Councilman
Okay.
Rouse. Just give me a moment to find which number that is. So we'll be going to the larger City Council as a whole on December 4th to get confirmation of the direction on this. And so it will include the consideration of higher densities and additional incentives in that central business district, which is like that downtown core area. Consider revising the geographic boundaries of various portions of the AUD program. We'll also be requesting that we get confirmation on exploring adjustments to the parking requirements, which could include a variety of things like unbundling parking, so allowing parking to maybe be in our parking structures, parking maximums, and also parking in lieu fees. We're also asking to make sure that we should continue to review requiring the AUD program projects to include inclusionary units at moderate incomes, rental rates, or pay an in lieu fee. And then also we'll be reviewing the trial period of the AUD program, which right now is 8 years or until 250 units are constructed. So that's the various parts of what we have called Phase 2 coming forward. One thing that will probably be stripped out and made separate from the other parts is that inclusionary housing, which is being processed by the Housing Division of Community Development along with the City Attorney's Office.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is, in terms of the threshold of Planning Commission review, did that remain the same? I believe it was 15,000 square feet. Is that? I'm getting some nods in the back there.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Rouse, the screen for Planning Commission review is 15,000 square foot or more lots that are in higher priority housing. Overall.
And was that part of any of the discussions, or is that?
That will be open for debate.
Okay.
There has been discussion of making the Planning Commission a decision-making authority on those.
All right, so we can bring that up later then. Okay, very good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I do want to clarify the definition of bedroom. So there is a definition in the new zoning ordinance that's different in the building code, and it essentially says any livable room other than a bathroom, kitchen, or living room. So if someone's saying it's a den, not a bedroom, the zoning staff would call it a bedroom regardless.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Councilmember Gutierrez, any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, is it possible to require the AUD projects to not allow the residents to own vehicles to eliminate the parking?
Chair Sneddon, Councilmember Gutierrez, we have had conditions on projects that require that, but those projects have been through like the Housing Authority or Habitat for Humanity. It's these entities that we know will persist in the future and that we have a longstanding relationship and we can count on them to do that because of how they work with the community. We don't do that for private development typically because it becomes an enforcement issue and there's not a lot of incentive for landlords to see that through. It's really hard to monitor.
Thanks.
And then I just had a couple quick questions. So right now we're looking at outside the business district, but in Phase 2 we'll be looking at inside business district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then you mentioned that the requirement for one parking place predates the adoption of the AUD, and that's for in the central business district or outside, or both?
Yes, Chairwoman, it is for inside the central business district. There was a requirement prior to the AUD program's adoption that said for residential units that were part of a mixed-use development that they would be allowed to have one parking space.
Okay. And then two more questions. One on page 4 of the draft ordinance. It's just the number 1, studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, residential unit parking. It says parking space shall be provided for each residential unit. Does it need to say on site, or is that purposely not specified? No.
Madam Chair, there are provisions in the zoning ordinance in the central business district that do allow for off-site parking for residential.
Okay, thank you. And then just one more. So since the direction was to be protecting existing mobile home parks, to the greatest extent. Does this cover that, or is there anything that would be considering in the future that we're not looking at right now?
Chair Sneddon, at this point in time, removing that parking incentive is staff's best recommendation to further protection. Of course, we can't completely guarantee that these won't be redeveloped by their property owners, but I do have a map I would like to put up that shows if they redeveloped to something other than a mobile home, so if they went through the AUD program, the constraints for the sites are very, very limited. So on this map here, you'll see the red is the buffer around the freeway that requires that additional vegetation as well as different air filtration systems for those projects. And then the green is the creek and environmentally sensitive special wildlife areas. So those have a buffer around them, as well as general plan policies to further protect them.
Madam Chair, in parallel with this effort, the City Attorney's Office is working on amendments to the mobile home conversion ordinance that will offer more protections for the existing mobile
Thank you.
homes.
So this is just in this with the AUD, but then there are also other ordinances coming.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions at this point? No? Okay, so we'll have public comment. We do have for pool time, it'll be 5 minutes, and for individual time, 3 minutes are our new time limits. Chris Barros has pool time with Ardell Hill. Is present? Is Ardell present? Okay. So 5 minutes when you're ready, Ms. Barros.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here. And this is the second time I've heard this presentation. I'm still a little unclear about it. So the only protection that staff is recommending at this time is the parking. Is that correct? I don't know who to address these questions to.
Yeah,
Okay,
go
sorry.
ahead and ask all of your questions, and then...
Okay, so I'm curious about if it's only the parking that we're talking about, and if we are redeveloped, does that mean that the setbacks and the open spaces, since the AUD will remain on the Flamingo Parks because of the numbers that were talked about at the last November 1st meeting, does that mean that if we are redeveloped, that the AUD incentives of setbacks and open spaces would still be eligible to the developers? And other than that, we just appreciate all the work that's been done, the time that's been put into this, and say thank you.
Thank you. You still have a few minutes of time if you want to reserve it. Okay, thank you. I think we'll address the questions after all the public comment. Thank you. Next, Brian Miller.
Hi, council members. My name is Brian Miller. I'm currently on the Single Family Design Board, and I've been on it for approximately 6 years, almost 7 years, I think. And so I've gotten to see kind of front line how this AUD program has affected the community in terms of the architectural integrity of our community. And I know more of the commercial projects are coming before ABR, and I don't know if you saw I'd recommend you look at the video of the last ABR meeting, in particular the property on 711 Milpas Street. It's causing a great deal of concern with the citizens. So I understand the overall ideals about AUD and allowing high density but low average income people to live here. But I actually have a comment, and this is what bothers me about the whole program. I'm a bit puzzled and perplexed, and perhaps you can explain to me, being that we are currently in a stage 2 drought, where current residential water users have seen stiff increases in their water bill, face penalties if they go over their allotment, where we don't even have enough water to supply our recirculating fountains around town, but somehow there's enough water to supply these high-density, megalithic, multiple housing units. I'd like to know the rationale for that. Also, I think the whole AUD program, though it sounds like it supposedly solves our so-called housing crisis, I think it actually is creating a bigger crisis. The rental units are still too expensive for those that are on an average income. The units not being required to supply adequate, sufficient parking overwhelm the already crowded streets with more cars, resulting in it becoming more and more undesirable for anyone to really want to visit our downtown core unless they are one of the lucky few who don't need a car, happen to work within walking distance of their work, and make enough money to afford the rent. My question is that real? Is that realistic? It undermines our architectural heritage, responsibility of managed reasonable growth, having it being replaced with overscaled buildings that do not fit the character of the city, transforming it into something unrecognizable, and in the long run, causing a bigger problem in its terms of managing an already overcrowded situation, making it worse. If you haven't noticed, the current street infrastructure is not designed to handle this type of high-density living. Number 4, what seems obvious and what is ultimately achieved, which is evidenced by those high-density units already built, is we are transforming our city from a low-density, expensive city to a less attractive, high-density, expensive city. I recommend the whole AUD program be abolished or seriously revised to reflect the reality of our limited natural resources and reflect on the true nature of market forces that ultimately dictate how much property is actually valued. And I totally understand about the crisis they're saying of State Street and the retail, and I have one word for that, and that's Amazon. So I think there needs to be some creative ideas in terms of getting people to come downtown, because the whole point of coming downtown is to create a destination. And so what is it about downtown that wants to attract people to be down there? So anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Lindsay Baker, followed by Mr. Burke.
Chair Snedden and committee members, I'm speaking for the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters has reviewed the proposed Phase 1 amendments to Title 30, the zoning ordinance of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code. The League supports the requirement for 2 on-site parking spaces for AUD programs units with 3 or more bedrooms in projects located outside the Central Business District CBD. The CBD is defined as generally being located between De La Vina Street and Garden and between Sola Street and the US 101. Staff assumes that inside the CBD, residential parking demand is typically lower due to the proximity of mixed uses, the ease of walking and bicycling, and the availability of transit. The League would like to see the exact boundaries of the CBD defined and data to support the assumption that residents in this area do not own more than one car. The League supports the exception for 100% affordable and senior housing. However, the permits for these projects should include enforceable conditions prohibiting the ownership of cars. The League supports the zoning ordinance amendment that all units approved under the AUD program be prohibited from future conversion to a hotel or similar use. And the League supports the removal of existing mobile home park properties from receiving the AUD parking incentives in order to preserve existing, more affordable housing stock. We note that mobile home parks are a housing resource that once lost will not be replaced. In addition, as we have seen, these AUD projects do not provide truly affordable rental housing for our workforce residents, while the existing mobile home parks do. We note that the currently proposed amendment does not alter the allowed maximum density of 27 units per acre in these existing mobile home parks. The League agrees that the additional space needed to meet the standard parking requirements for multi-unit residential projects and the additional land needed to provide adequate creek and freeway setbacks to meet policies and ordinances for new development substantially reduce the likelihood of redevelopment in these sites. We also note that the development incentives of the original AUD program related to setbacks, open yard, and minimum distance between buildings were made to apply to all multi-unit development in the recent adoption of Title 30 and no longer serve as incentives specific to the AUD program. With the above precautions, the League supports the amendments and urges the Ordinance Committee to forward them to City Council to expedite the much-needed amendments to the AUD incentive program. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker will be Mr. Burke.
Members, I remember attending one of the first, I think they were called charrettes, and that introduced this program. And I was against it then, and I'm against it now, because I think that the whole premise, excuse the hat, it keeps me warm. It's based upon more people per square inch means lower rents. That has not panned out. I do not think it ever will. As long as you let market forces rule the day, the rents are going to be higher than people can afford, at least in our times. I remember Bendy White said that, we'll try it. If it doesn't work, we'll get rid of it. Also, architecture makes attitude. And I think the complaints that the areas surrounding where some of the recent buildings in the last 5 years have been constructed are affected by it. So I mimic Reagan. Does this mean I have 153 left? Oh my.
Yes.
It affects the parking. It affects the neighborhood with more people. So in summary, I mimic Reagan when he was in front of the Berlin Wall. Tear down this program.
Thank you. As our final speaker, you still have 1 minute and 20 seconds reserved if you'd like to use those later. It is now to the committee for discussion. Mayor Pro Tem Ross.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question, I think, probably for Mr. Vincent. In terms of our ability to maximize protections for the existing mobile home parks, and I think Mr. Gullett was saying this is pretty much as effective as we can be from this level. Is that because there's an overlay of mobile home park statutes from the state, are there not, in terms of maintaining their affordability or their existence? And other than removing the parking incentive, are there other things we could do at this level to ensure mobile home parks are not redeveloped as other things?
So, Madam Chair and Councilmember Rouse, I'll reiterate Ms. Mesinger's explanation in her staff report that there are several different constraints that these parks have. I would note that all of these parks were developed at a time and at densities that are no longer available under the current zoning. Their unit count is well above the residential densities that would be allowed under the medium-high AUD residential densities, coupled with the environmental impacts of or the constraints of the next to Highway 101 air quality setback, and then also creek setbacks that would apply. The only other thing that the council could consider, but it would take a lot more analysis and evaluation from staff, would be to actually rezone these properties to some other zoning density other than the medium-high average unit size density. The reason that I say that it would require more analysis is that the no net loss housing statute requires two different findings that have to be made before you can reduce the residential density of any site. The first is that the reduction of that density would be consistent with general plan policies, and second, that the reduction of that residential density would still keep the city able to meet its RHNA requirements, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment requirements or allocation requirements. We haven't done that analysis, and so that would take some time to evaluate whether we could how staff could recommend a different density. It would be, we would have average unit size density as our multifamily density for the rest of the community, and then it would basically be some new residential density separate and apart for the mobile home parks. It's difficult to imagine that right now. I mean, just without having, I'm not able to conceive that a justification for a completely different residential density. So at this point, the recommendation from staff and what is available to the council for consideration at this time would be the staff recommendation of removing the development standard incentives otherwise allowed for the medium-high residency, the residential density standards, and leaving the density standard alone for these mobile home parks.
And Chair Sneddon, Councilman Rouse, if I may, during the meeting on December 4th, when we get direction to continue forward looking at changing the densities in the AUD program, that might actually allow us to have some leftover density that then we could look at these mobile home parks and that no net loss of the Housing and Community Development Department, so it wouldn't impact our housing element. But like our attorney said, it's a much bigger process, but that's something we could look at in the future.
Thank you for the clarification.
Did you have a question? Councilmember Gutierrez.
Just again, sorry. So you said it'd be difficult to enforce a no car ownership clause, but like how difficult, if you had to describe it?
Chair Sneddon, Councilmember Gutierrez. So if we don't have parking provided on site, then someone owns a car, they're parking it somewhere else. So that's really the unknown, like where these cars end up, and that's also a difficulty for entities like the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority can look at DMV records, and they do look at DMV records, and they do give preference to residents that don't own cars in their application process. So they have additional tools that a typical landlord wouldn't have. A typical landlord isn't looking at DMV records, and again, it's the incentive structure. So the Housing Authority wants a good relationship with the community. They want to follow through on their conditions, where a private landlord is looking for return on investment. It may not be something that's a big priority of theirs, especially if the city has little way of telling who is owning cars where and where those are parked.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Councilmember Gutierrez, the other point I would make is that this program was started as an incentive for private developers without public subsidy to develop new housing units. A private developer who is mandated to not allow anyone who owns a car to be a tenant or an owner of a unit, that severely limits their potential market for who might be a tenant or who might buy these units. In that realm, I'm not sure you're going to find any developer willing to construct a project without being able to consider all potential occupants as part of their market. It's a policy question for the council to consider, but as far as trying to get market rate developers to build units, to cut their potential market significantly would be a real disincentive for them to want to go through the process to construct a project.
I respectfully disagree, but I appreciate the answer.
Okay. I would like to address some of the questions from the public comment. Do we have data on residents in the area? How many own multiple cars, or any kind of data to that question?
Chair Sneddon, there is information from the census that's available. We don't have that with us today. The increased parking for the 3+ bedroom units has been discussed at council multiple times. It's part art. I mean, so these units are occupied by different people over time. Even the same families can have different numbers of cars and change jobs and need a car at one point in life and not in another. So it is difficult in some cases to guess. When staff was originally proposing AUD to council, staff was recommending 1.5 spaces per unit regardless, and council consciously accepted 1 space per unit, anticipating that parking demand may not be met on site, but wanting construction of this housing. So that was the choice council made back in when the general plan was adopted in 2011.
I also have a general question about it. If on December 4th we're looking at the larger phase 2 options and whether even to continue the AUD program or not, is looking at these issues first, how does that affect what we'll be able to decide then, or we could then undo these decisions we make today if then the whole program is reworked?
Chair Sneddon, so we're coming back to confirm that other direction on December 4th. This item is pending for full council on January 15th. So if there's direction to be changed between now and then, that can be made. These items were brought out early because they were identified early. They look like lower hanging fruit. They're generally protective of neighborhoods, mobile home parks, and preventing conversion to things like short-term rentals. So that's we prioritize these accordingly.
So taking these steps now wouldn't preclude us from later talking about setbacks or open spaces or densities or the overlays of where to put them.
Correct.
Okay. So the 3 that we have agendized for today then would be the parking, 2 on-site parking for 3 or more bedrooms outside of the CBD. We're not considering inside CBD today. No conversion of AUDs to hotels, and to remove the mobile home park properties from the AUD, but that also does not preclude us from the other ordinance that we're looking at for protecting mobile home parks in the future. Okay. Councilmember Gutierrez.
I appreciate the hard work that staff put into re-examining this issue, and I feel that although it might be a concern that if we get stricter with the parking requirement and possibly looking at alternatives to, maybe regulating whether people own cars, that might turn away some developers, but I'm pretty sure that people are still going to be willing to want to build here, even if that is a requirement. So just throwing that out there. I am going to move forward with the staff recommendation on this. Thank you.
Second. I have a comment as well.
Okay. Was that a motion, Councilmember Gutierrez?
Yes.
Okay. And a second
that
from
was it.
Rouse?
Yeah. In that
Okay.
case, that's a second.
Okay. Any further discussion on moving these 3 forward to council?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Rouse?
Thank you. Well, I know that Planning Commission and staff has really taken direction from council and very much vetted all these issues. The AUD was something I was a part of during the development, and it is incredibly imperfect as an ordinance. I'm not in love with a lot of the results so far. In speaking to Mr. Gutierrez's concern about automobiles and whatnot, the concern really is, the theory was to live where you work. The problem is we're missing those jobs. We do a lot of hospitality, retail, and government. That's what we do. And so the idea that you're going to automatically consider the central business district where everybody's going to work, especially given the fact you've got market force rents, people are actually probably going to need automobiles to get to Goleta or Carpinteria, wherever they happen to work. So this is an improvement. I like the fact that I think it was actually the Arlington Village that kind of kicked off this concept of two or more than 2 bedrooms needing a second parking space so we don't further impact neighborhoods. So I am, along with Mr. Gutierrez, very willing to move this along. I think staff and PC did a great job on this.
Thank you, and I'd like to add one further comment too, that in general, I don't believe the AUD incentive program is addressing the needs of what it originally intended. I believe the whole program needs to be reworked, so I am reluctant to make any amendments to what I think needs to be completely changed, but I do think these mobile home park protections are very important, and we do need more parking outside the central business district. So I am in support of these particular changes, and I'm looking forward to our December meeting when we can really look at the whole program altogether. So I will also be supporting the motion, and if we could have a roll call vote.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Rouse.
Aye.
Madam Chair Snedden.
Aye.
Thank you.
And with that, we are adjourned.